How do I put
2025.
myself slightly worse off?
Yeah, let's each time we go live, Guru Nation, we are live. Fraud pod, not legal, tax, or God forbid, medical advice. And it's my buddy Darshan, man.
Hey,
Yeah,
first of
haven't
all,
seen you in a few
before we
weeks.
start, can
Yeah.
we all first congratulate Dan Safara? Can we all
Thank
just
you.
collectively come together and talk to Daddy Dan?
2
'Cause-
weeks of no sleep or incremental sleep. I'm trying to get sponsored by Yerbay, actually. And this is not a joke. Like, I messaged them
Oh,
on Instagram. They sent me this form I got to fill out. But I'm
oh,
following
really?
up with them now. Yeah, I don't want money. I just want like free drinks. Like, I want cases of this. I'm
Or you could
tired of
get
going to
both.
Costco.
You could get both.
Nah, I don't want to push it. Like, shout out to Creo and Anato. They pay me.
Yeah.
I can't drink Creo, but Yerbay is gonna keep me awake. Like,
Yeah.
so I just want cases, man. And I don't know. We're close. We're close to
Yeah.
an agreement. I think we're
Nice.
negotiating how many cases per month.
Are you really?
Yeah, we're close,
That's
man.
awesome.
Yeah, I went to Costco yesterday and did a 4
Is
case
it good?
pickup. Yeah, and it's equivalent to 2 cups of caffeine, coffee, 160 milligram per can.
So how many of those do you have a day?
Well, in a 24-hour period, I'm around 800 milligrams of caffeine.
And what's the safe?
1,000.
Did you look into it, or are you just making that up?
No, I definitely looked into
Okay.
it. Chronic kidney disease dangers are around 1,000. So
Well, at least you've looked into it.
stage 1, yeah. This is hopefully temporary. But yeah, it's been crazy, man. And
I mean, while you've been busy, bringing life to this world, a lot of things have changed.
a lot. I mean, we discussed some of them. Back before you took some time off.
I did.
We were kind of talking like hypothetically. Well, this is likely to happen. RFK is likely to get confirmed. Doge is likely to cut costs everywhere, and
Yeah.
a few weeks later, it's like, well, that happened.
Yeah.
We told you about it. It sucks. I'll preface it by saying it sucks for the people. Like, I'm fairly empathetic. I treat my employees super good. Like, I actually care what happens to them even beyond my site. Like, I really feel for, on an individual level, just human beings that work in the space.
Yeah.
At the same time, nobody loves you in this industry more than you should love yourself, and you should always be ready for this kind of stuff. Like, maybe it's not going to be from Trump, but maybe it'll be from Latin America and global outsourcing, or maybe it'll be because COVID. Like, before the hiring frenzy of after COVID, there was a hiring freeze. Like, there was a
Was there?
dip.
I
People
don't remember
were,
that part.
yeah, there were not like mass layoffs, but there was like everything was on hold for a few months. And then everything picked up. As a site owner, I remember studies were like, hey, no biz dev right now. Let's figure out what's happening. And then green light, okay, boom, we took off. But it could have gone left too. It could have, like, just as easily in a parallel universe. I know you're a Marvel fan. Turned left. It could have turned left. And you kind of have to anticipate these things in advance, in my opinion. And
see, there's a difference, though. I would argue that as in private business, you do expect ups and downs, and when you join a smaller site, you join a larger site, you kind of go, yeah, you know what? I'm more likely to be laid off than not.
Yeah.
Or I may be open to being laid off. That's just part of the game. I'm
Yeah.
part of that process. But if you're part of academia, if you're part of the government, you give up a lot of the upside, which
For
is
stability.
correct, for stability.
Yeah.
And I feel like what we're looking at right now is not of the upside, but no stability as well, which means that come the next go around, when you're trying to hire new people are going to go, why am I going to take the lower pay? Why am I going? And I think that's the price we're going to land up paying.
And
overall.
I think people are going to say there is no such thing as stability. Like, you make your own stability, right? You can't depend on.
But you couldn't. And I'll tell you why. Because
Yeah.
people, how do we do this in private industry? We kind of go, I'm going to have multiple jobs. I'm going to have multiple sort of
Gonna hustle.
roles. Right. I'll keep hustling. You can't hustle. As Elon Musk has come on and said, if you have more than one job, you're fired right
You're
there.
fired on the spot.
So
Yeah.
you can't actually address your
Most CROs do that too.
sure.
CROs did also
Some
have
CROs absolutely do.
Yeah.
But the question then is, how do you defray your risk? What is the right way to do that?
I think it's you building your skill set, your repertoire, knowing that, okay, I am in a government role. There's plus side to being in that role too. I know it sucks for people that got laid off, but there are a lot of private industry companies that would like to
Oh, absolutely.
pick your brain in a way, but have you on their team. Like, hey, you were just at the NIH. Like, you're a valuable asset to our organization. Let's figure out how to approach AMCs, how to approach FDA, all this kind of stuff.
I think it comes with good and bad. And what I mean by that is, I think there are a lot of people who go, oh, government, you tend to work slower than industry. Can you hustle the way we need you to hustle in private industry? On the other hand, like you said, they have a lot of knowledge, institutional knowledge, that goes, that's not how these decisions are made at all. I was there. I know exactly how these decisions are made.
Yeah.
And sometimes you pay for that. Now, are you seeing those people? Here's the problem. What we're looking at is mass layoffs. We're not talking about 15 people.
We're talking
about
like
thousands of
80%. Like, if Musk did what he did to X, to Twitter,
Right. But he's not looking at that. He's looking at
he
pretty
said not.
significant,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah. But that was 80% of the workforce
yeah,
got let
it's
go.
significant. So the
So if
question
this
then is,
like 30%, right?
you're going to have a flood. I think that gives some opportunities for people like you and me, because if you don't have those employees, that work still needs to get done, they're going to look at outside vendors, which may end up being significantly more expensive.
Right.
But what does that mean for these career people who have 20, 30 years of experience? And I'm not sure that's the smartest place to have taken it. But I'm not sure how you do this in a way, because you could spend the next 4 years trying to battle the lawsuits and give notice and do all of those things. And the truth is that people are going, they're still in favor of what Trump's doing. So, you know what? There's something to be said for, that's what I signed up for, and I'm okay with where we are. What I worry about is in a couple of years, in about 2 years, Trump's going to come out and he's going to go, well, I want to keep I want to get the Republicans elected. And they're going to go, I lost my job because of you. I'm not letting a Republican in. So I think that vote bank's going to come back to bite him as time goes on. But let's see. What do you think?
I haven't thought that far ahead of Trump trying to, or another Republican trying to get reelected in, what would it be, 28?
No, I was thinking actually 26.
Or 26. Oh, you're saying for the
Midterms.
Midterms, yeah. Yeah, I haven't considered that actually. My concerns with this have been rare disease research and things that private industry doesn't necessarily want to go after. Do you think there will be regulatory reform similar to what the FDA did with the, what was it, the 503C or 505B pathway, where you take a generic and flip it to like a new formulation?
Sure, you're talking the 505B2 pathway, I
There
assume,
you
is what
go,
you're thinking
there
of.
you go. Do you think you'll have something similar? I know they already have orphan drug exclusivity, and they have incentives, or at least they tried to put incentives to get private industry to go after rare diseases or things that, if you're a private company looking at it, there's maybe not that much profit. It's not worth investing. With enough incentives, do you think the NIH void could ever be filled by private industry?
I don't think what you're referring to ties to NIH in the same way you think it does. I mean, I think NIH obviously plays a big role in deciding what research to do. So I think there may be some advantages there. But I think that what I'm hearing is, as of yesterday, I think, or this morning, there were layoffs at the FDA, but they were primarily in CDRH, which interestingly enough is where Musk was paying a lot of attention. If you were going to lay people off, I would have thought it would come from drugs, from CDER, because it's significantly more people in CDER than in CDRH.
Right.
But yet we went to CDRH, which to me speaks to Musk going, I understand this because I had one dealing with them.
With Neuralink, right?
Neuralink, exactly right. Um,
So you're thinking it's like a vendetta, personal
I
vendetta?
know I'm really hoping it's not a vendetta thing. I think it's
Yeah.
more, what do I know enough, or at least I think I know enough about, where I can say it's just inefficient.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about drugs. No one's complaining about drugs. Maybe I'll just shut up about it. I'll
Yeah.
let RFK Jr. try to handle that part of it. Right now, from an efficiency standpoint, I'm not worried. We're just gonna lay these people off, and that's kind of how it gets played. Now, to your point, will there be a drop in investment into orphan disease states, into orphan drugs? I don't think, as it stands.
People are afraid. That's what I'm reading on LinkedIn.
Yeah, but I don't think it's at least I haven't seen those posts, so I don't know exactly what their logic there is. But I think the concern I have is no one's saying that the investment into orphan drugs is going away. What I think is probably going to end up happening is um, the Trump administration has come out and pulled out a lot of guidances. Right now, they've primarily focused on the DEI stuff, but overall, they've been like, we want you to lead based on uh, regulations, if not the laws themselves, not based on guidances. Now, technically speaking, that's completely in line with the Loper-Bright decision, which is what the Supreme Court came out and said. And they said that we're not going to give deference to agency guidance. We are going to give deference to the law itself, not the interpretation that the agency gives to the law.
Right.
So I think there was a lot of, I don't know what to base my decisions on. And I think the Trump administration makes that harder. But that's across the board. I don't think it's just a rare disease state issue. I think it's across the board.
Right.
The play on initial investment, whether that be from NIH or not, NIH at best is funding some of this, but it's not the sole provider. Private industry funds it. You might find. Go ahead.
What do you think the main risk then is to society, like from the NIH, these budget cuts, if at all? Or is this being overplayed because people are emotional, understandably so? Or is there a genuine concern for the United States' public health before we consider the rest of the world, at least the United States?
I think there are two different things we can look at, right? So the first one is when we talk NIH, what are we talking about? Are we talking about firing people? Or are we talking about the funding cuts? Or are we talking about the 15% overhead? So let's take each one individually. The firing people, I think it goes to speed. It goes to quickness. I just read this article saying that China, for example, you remember reading about DeepSeek?
Of course, yeah. That was all the rage like a week ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Feels like forever ago. So DeepSeek was supposed to be this thing where the US thinks about raw processing power, and they're going to make things better for OpenAI by throwing money at the problem. China said, we don't need the latest thing. What we're going to do is we're just going to improve on the stuff you already had. And technically, it seems that if you look at the 505B2 pathway, or technically the 505J pathway, which is the generic drugs pathway, what we really tell the FDA says is, can you make the exact same copy as the last one? So that's how I know that I don't need to get more studies and stuff, and you can come out faster. China's come out completely differently, and they're saying, can you make it better? Because if you can make it better, then we can just keep improving, which we haven't seen done before. So I think NIH, as it slows down, I think China may land up coming in and saying, we'll take over some of this research because we can move faster.
And that's an existential risk to the United States, in my opinion.
Yeah,
it should be clear to everyone. I think like you kind of want to remain dominant as the United States in this.
Yes.
Innovations.
I think that if the West continues in its current policies, its dominance will be threatened, because I don't think Europe is really as threatening as people make it out to be, because the laws in Europe are almost stifling.
Europe's going the opposite way. They're going to lose this AI race really quickly unless they have massive reforms there, which it doesn't look like they will.
Doesn't seem likely. Yeah. I think the US has a chance. In fact, I read somewhere that Musk wants to pull in IRS data. I read that he wants to. JP Morgan, I heard, wants to put all of the data into one big pile. and let AI have its way with it. I don't know how legal that is. I think someone has to do a full analysis.
They got to hire you, man.
They're welcome to try. I'd be happy to talk to them.
Mm.
But I think the big question that they need to figure out is, can that data even be thrown into the same pool? There's so much risk to do something like that.
Right.
And I think that those are some of the risks you face.
But wasn't one of the immediate observations coming out of COVID was we are way too dependent, we being the United States,
Sure.
first, way too dependent on China for our infrastructure, our raw pharmaceutical ingredients, supply chain,
Sure.
yada, yada. And that was Trump back then too.
Sure.
But pretty much that was bipartisan. Everyone agrees that's correct.
Yeah.
Just like bipartisan, everyone was anti-TikTok, spying
Sure.
on Americans.
Anti-China. Very anti-China. Yep.
Right. So this is along the same vein.
Yeah.
So you're saying one of the risks might be that this benefits China
Yep.
by us kind of slowing things down or just
Right.
being in a little bit of chaos here.
Yeah, but I don't think it's as big a risk yet. And the reason it's not as big a risk yet is because I know that most countries will depend on US FDA or EMA approval, or maybe even the Australian agency's approval to go, you know what, we're good enough with that. I don't know of countries that are going, I'll directly depend off of China approval to approve your drug in our country.
Right.
So not yet, not that I'm aware of. That may change over time, but especially if you start culling our FDA forces, our FDA knowledge base as much as we are, because people are going to go, I can't trust the FDA anymore because you simply don't have the manpower.
Right.
That is significant soft power that gets lost.
Correct. And I think you can't grade China on the same curve. Like we're still in this country and in most of the Western world, we're still about individual rights. And in China,
Yep.
That's kind of takes a backseat. Like individual rights, a nice luxury. We'll give it to you when things are going well. But in reality, it's not individual right. It's collective.
It's about the public good. But the truth is that's also, for example, in countries like Israel, where they'll say that, you know what, take all of our data, put it together, where we as a country think it's better for humanity to have access to all of our data. And I think Musk and I want to say Jamie Dimon, I could be wrong about this, they're all coming together and saying, we want access to all of the data that you guys are hoarding. And we'll deal with the lawsuits later on. And it's one of those situations where the data may just go out and then you're just dealing with it. That seems to be more likely than not right now, the way things are going. People are just going, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to be a bull in a China store, but we'll deal with it afterwards.
No pun intended. Bull in a China shop.
Yeah. So
there's a lot of emotion around this issue, which
there should be. There should be.
Okay, so that's one of the risks is China gain ground.
Yeah.
What else? Like people are really afraid of rare disease.
Well, I think the other one is, so one was funding cuts to promote original science, which we kind of talked a little bit about that, because original science is changing. If you take it to China, they're not trying to do original science. They're trying to do improvement and
they're copy and paste.
Correct. Yeah. Well, it's not so much copy and paste. Copy, improve, and paste.
Yeah, correct.
But so I think,
or a better word would be steal.
Sure. The Chinese aren't even saying that I care about that. You can accuse me of stealing. I'm fine with that.
They don't consider it stealing.
They don't consider it stealing. Copyright and trademarking and intellectual property is much more well respected in the Western world than in the Eastern world.
Of course.
So if that's true, they're going to go, okay, not a big deal.
Right.
Then, and to be fair, I think China actually has come out, and I'd read somewhere that they now are the #1 patent filers in the world. I could be wrong about that, but they're patent filers. I don't know how many of them issue. I don't know how many of those patents matter, but they're filing patents. I also know that it's not necessarily the U.S. ones are that much better either. So what do I know?
They're just defensive patents against
correct
outside China people still.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's the first one. The second one is loss of manpower. That's the other risk. So enforcement of rules. is a whole big issue. And we just talked a little bit about that around resource protection, the soft power that comes with it, and how we'd be losing that.
Okay.
Go
So
ahead.
if I can find a modern example, everyone points to Moderna.
Sure.
Moderna got its start from the NIH. People pointing to Ozempic and all the
Sure.
GLPs. I mean, to some extent, yes. But do you think those drugs would have still materialized without something like the NIH? And that's not what's happening. The NIH is not going away, but let's go worst case scenario. Do those drugs
Sure.
still exist? Does someone like Jennifer Doudna with
Mhm.
the Cas9, CRISPR technology,
Sure.
still have her breakthrough without NIH involvement?
I think most would agree that the NIH was a huge help.
Mhm.
I think most would agree that um, it's sort of like digging wells or searching for gold by digging whatever boreholes or whatever it is. If you dig 5 of them, you may hit something. You dig 1,000 of them, you'll dig more. You're more likely to hit oil. So, yeah, can you theoretically do it? Sure, it's possible, but just much more unlikely.
Hmm.
So to your point, whether we're talking about Cas9 or we're talking about, you mentioned the GLP ones. I thought the
GLPs.
GLP ones were discovered in Europe because
In
of
Europe, but it was with NIH grants
was
as
it? I
well.
didn't know
Yeah,
that. Okay,
yeah.
fair enough. So yeah, it's possible, but less likely, significantly less likely.
And what makes it less likely? Like, what is
Because you
it?
so what here's the way these research grants usually work, right? So what you'll end up doing is you go, I have this idea, I don't know what it is. It's basic research often, and you're going, I want to discover more about how this enzyme system works. Now, this one unique doctor sitting in somewhere goes, I want to discover more. And someone comes in and goes, here's $5,000, go figure it out. And that's coming from the NIH, or that's coming from somewhere else. I'm making it up. It's never $5,000. It's
Right.
significantly better than
Like
that.
50, 500.
Sure, 50, 500, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then, but the US is the one taking those chances. It's you typically not private industry taking that initial chance.
Right.
Now, out of the now sometimes something interesting comes in, something interesting doesn't come in. Now you've got 1,000 borrow holes, of which say something interesting came out of, I don't know, 500 of them. Now private industry comes in and says, out of those 500, purely based on timing, purely based on what I'm interested in, purely based on what funding I have, I'm going to look at 40 of them.
And they do that through their networking and through things like tech transfer offices
Exactly right.
at the
Exactly right.
AMCs.
Correct.
Okay. But
So,
that's not going away, or is it? Because it's
like the
unclear.
tech transfer offices, or which part?
Tech transfer, but this whole process of like applying for a
Well,
grant,
but the thing is
exploratory
now,
research.
at this second, that whole granting process is stopped, right? No
Pause.
one knows what's going on right now.
Right. Right.
If you're in DI, it's just 100% stopped.
Correct. Like things
But
like I was in a DEI clinical trial actually last year with microaggressions in research.
right,
Like that's considered a DEI,
sure,
uh, and they got an NIH grant and everything. It was through Tufts.
yeah. And we can talk a little bit about DEI research and when is it actually DEI and when is it not. So we can have a
Sure,
whole
sure.
discussion on that as
Okay, so
well.
right now it's on pause. Everything, not just DEI. Everything.
A lot of stuff is on pause only because, at least that's how I understand. To be clear, I haven't been following it as closely as to know exactly the status. But my understanding is most things are on pause until we get a better, like there's an audit. I think they were looking at a 90-day audit, is my recollection.
Okay.
And there are probably experts out there dealing with just NIH stuff, going, no, you have it wrong, and that's fine, that's fair.
So there's three things then. There's the mass layoffs, like you
Yep,
said.
yep,
There's the overhead
yep.
going
Well,
from
we haven't
20.
discussed the overhead yet.
We
We haven't
haven't discussed that yet. So mass layoffs. What's the second one that we were
original
discussing?
research.
Original research. Okay, so these are okay. So these are like the sheer number of scientists
Correct.
working. Were they all full time or were they part
So they were
time?
not working necessarily for the NIH. That's where the
Okay,
funding came from.
okay. So they're still there at their AMCs or whatever. It's just a matter of
Theoretically,
getting
but who's going to
funding
pay
for
for
them.
that? Yeah, exactly.
Who's gonna pay for it?
So you've got a
So
bunch of these doctors sitting, or PhDs sitting in AMCs whose positions were funded by grants, and now suddenly, what do you do with them?
do you potentially see this being good for big pharma because now they could use their financial leverage over the smaller biotechs to fund co-fund, co-sponsor, kind of take the place of the NIH grants. Like maybe Eli Lilly comes in and says, "Hey, we're really interested in, whatever mechanism of action. Who's
But they
the
were doing
top
that already.
scientist?"
They were doing that already. So the question is, is industry willing to, instead of funding 5 grants that they're interested in, are they willing to fund 500 to know that 250 of them don't work? That's where we
Correct.
are right now.
And the additional layer is AI
Yeah.
being able to discover, if you equate it to digging in the
Yeah.
ground,
Yeah.
maybe I can have a map for where to
Maybe.
fund, where
But
not.
I don't think our AI is there yet. I
Mm.
think maybe in 10 years, maybe it is.
So it's not
That
there.
this is a good area to dig in.
I see.
But I don't think our AI knows yet what to look for, like what makes something good. So people can pretend that it
But the
is.
AI is more.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just
And
trying to distill this down to first principles. Like, what is actually gonna be lost?
well, I think
And
what's
then,
going to be lost is a lot of. So number one, I mean, I can think of several things that will be lost. Right. First is there's a downstream effect, which is I think people at the NIH will suddenly lose jobs. That losing of the jobs and the losing of the funding is going to cause people in AMCs to suddenly lose positions because their jobs were funded by that as well. That by itself is massive knowledge loss. Now, where will those people go? They might go work inside industry, but industry right now is not set up to do original research. Going back, I don't know, 60 years, that's what industry used to do. That's not where we are right now. Now, they might go work in China. They might say the Chinese government will pay for this. They might go work in, I'm making
Europe.
this up, India, in Europe.
I actually saw like semi-joking comments on some of my posts, like from one of my friends in Europe. She was
Yeah.
saying, "Are you considering moving?" Like,
Mhm.
because she's reading all the headlines and she
Yeah.
thinks I'm affected by this. And as far as I can tell, I'm not affected by any of these. I'm
Not
in
yet.
private space.
But
Not
now
yet.
imagine, but here's the thing. Now imagine there are fewer drugs that are being tested. Now there's
Yeah.
suddenly fewer sites that are needed to do the
Right.
actual clinical research that goes with it. So your delay is probably in a few years, you might see the impact of that.
Is that a real risk?
Depends on what happens with the NIH, right? We're still in the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
And
And
they haven't. The issue is they haven't really gave much color
correct.
on
Correct.
what the
All we
long
know
term
is
plan
it
is.
stopped. Stopped because it's stopping or stopped because we're pausing. And we don't have all the clarity we need yet. A lot of stuff we're reading, this is why I worry a little bit. I think whether you look at mainstream media, you look at podcasts, or you look at something else, you get a very biased perspective on the news. I
Correct.
can't tell whether we're stopping because Trump is anti-science. It's possible. Hey, Kevin, good to see you. Belated Happy New Year.
Alvin, what up? Yeah, you guys will meet each other at SOS.
That's right. I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, I mean, I
But that's
think
why we come on and do this. Like, we try to be non-political, and
yeah,
obviously we both have our preferences, but
sure.
when it comes to broad strokes of government cuts, I mean, we're not expert at that. You way more than me, but even you're not expert
No,
on
not at all.
everything that's going on.
There's a
But we
lot of
can still
stuff
have
here.
opinions, but we try to find first principles. I think,
Yeah.
like, what is actually, and now you're speaking my language and a lot of side owners' language. Maybe 5 years from now, if we still don't have a resolution, yeah, Darshan does look great in the sweater. If you're listening on the pod, he's wearing like a salmon colored. Is that
Something like
what
that. Yeah,
like
that
a
seems.
lox,
I can't tell. Yeah, it's like a salmon colored
like a
thing.
lox and cream cheese? What is it? Cashmere or
No, it's wool. I think.
wool?
I did not know I'd be getting into like walking the red carpet. Who made that sweater?
I got Hurley. I got this at Costco because it was
I don't even
deal.
know where I got this. My girlfriend got it for me, so I don't really know where I got it. But
Okay. Shout out to the girlfriend. They know
that's
how to
right.
buy stuff
Joy.
better.
Shout out to Joy.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
Because there's a lot of emotion out there right now.
yes, and it should be. It's
And
people's jobs. It's people's livelihoods.
of course, well, that's gone already. Like, that's already
Have they
gone.
though? I don't know yet.
Well, I mean, on my LinkedIn newsfeed, I see I've just been laid off. I need help. Where am I gonna go? Looks great. I think he'll look great with
I'm
lavender.
down with
too.
lavender as well.
Yeah.
Now I know. Are you handing out lavender shirts at SOS?
That's Brad's job, is the gear and apparel. He's made a
Okay.
few t-shirt designs.
I know. I did notice that actually. I'm excited for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are we
So,
buying those? Or are those like prizes?
both. There's
Oh,
Easter eggs. There's prizes. There's
man.
Chris might shoot them like they
Oh,
do at
nice.
an athletic event. I know you're a huge fan out of those
Dude.
Canon, the
Yeah, I
t-shirt.
know exactly what you mean. You know what? By the way, for me not being an athletic person, even though I was an athlete, but
Oh, you're a black belt,
yeah. But
gold
ignoring that
medalist.
for a second. I mean, you can see the medals there, but he does make Kevin makes essential oils. The Eagles won. Can you believe that?
Oh
Go
yeah, I
Birds.
didn't even congratulate you, man. How? Congrats, man. Worst Super Bowl I've watched in my life, actually.
Really?
Yeah, halftime show was good, but I knew the mainstream wouldn't like it because Kendrick.
don't
I
know what was
love
going on.
Kendrick. Listen, I
Oh,
love
was it Kendrick Lamar?
Yeah,
Okay.
I love him. I've been a fan of his since '08.
Okay.
He's not a Super Bowl like
No.
mainstream does not know his songs. Like you need like Lil Wayne would have been the appropriate choice. Lil Wayne is mainstream. Everybody would have been singing his
I thought
song.
everyone likes the whole grudge between Kendrick and Drake was the whole thing, right?
Yeah, but that's like 2 songs. Like when you're looking for a Super Bowl headliner,
Yeah.
you want so many hits that like people are like, "Oh, he didn't do this one." Like he had 20 more he could have done. Kendrick had like I love him, but come
Sure.
on, nobody knows those songs, man. Only like hardcore rap people know those songs.
Kevin seems to
Kelvin knows
agree with
what's
you.
up. Of course, I think most sensible people would agree with me. And I loved it. I loved it. But I put myself in the shoes of like Mary Jane from Des Moines, Iowa.
Did the shoes fit?
Huh?
You said you put yourself in the shoes of Mary Jane from
Oh,
Iowa. I was like,
they probably don't fit, but let's try to make them fit. She doesn't
okay.
know what the hell's going on. Lil
He
Wayne would have
would
clearly
agree,
been,
right? There you
and
go.
it's in New Orleans, but whatever. There's more important things to discuss, like people losing their jobs,
Right.
like maybe treatments and cures not happening.
Yeah. I think that's sort of what we're looking at. I don't think we're going to see the impact this year.
But are
I mean,
those
let me
alarming?
rephrase that. You're seeing the impact this year itself, but I think for clinical research, just wait. I mean, you're already seeing that in terms of like overhead and the like. I thought the overhead is. I can't remember if that's USAID or that's NIH or both. I think it
NIH
was
went from
NIH is my
28
recollection. Yeah.
28 to 15. They
Right.
cut their overhead, which is the last thing on our list
Last,
of things to
exactly right.
discuss. Or at least
Um,
NIH speaking.
correct. But the
Not yet,
thing was,
Kelvin. We are now discussing the
there we
15%
go.
cap on
There we
indirect
go.
cost for NIH.
So I think my opinion on the 15%, and I know a lot of people will disagree with me, is I think that overall, it's too broad, but I think that it's completely in line with what Musk and Trump said they would do. So we may not like it as an industry. The question is, can we cope? I think this is the first time it's like suddenly someone has to come in and be the bad parent and go, no,
Right.
you need to be put into timeout.
Right.
There are implications, there are repercussions. Can we as a society deal with that?
No,
And
I'm taking the iPad, right?
exactly right.
But the critics say, well, when you take your child's iPad, you're taking away like a poison, a toxin.
Exactly. Sure.
Here, you're taking away cures for cancer.
Correct. Exactly right.
Which is the
But the question is, are
idealistic-
you? I don't know the answer
Right.
to that question because indirect costs are there's a lot of, how should I put this? There's a lot of leeway in indirect costs. Now, some might argue that these indirect costs are unfair because private industry doesn't pay them, so why should the government?
Right.
Some people will argue that because private industry doesn't pay them, that's why the government should pay them, because
Yeah.
that's how you have functioning healthcare systems.
Right.
Some will say that in certain disease states, like cancer, for example, you simply need higher like caps for
Sure.
indirect costs.
Sure. But
Some people,
there's private industry that does oncology research as well.
yes, they do. However, not for the same types of studies.
Mhm.
Now they are. I'm sorry. What? I don't know what you're referring to, Lisa.
Yeah, at least explain further. We're trying to get to the bottom of this using the iPad example because I think this is a good thing for people to understand.
Oh, sure. Private
This
does
is-
pay them. They're called overhead, but it's not at a 50%, 60% rate. And when they do, I think that smaller sites are able to manage them better than
you can ask
larger
for a
sites.
50 to
Yeah.
60. Usually you end up with a 30, 35%
Right.
overhead.
Right.
And that's not to speak of how quickly, objectively speaking, private sites can get started faster,
Yeah.
sometimes
And
even
I've
enroll more.
negotiated these for private sites all the time. I've negotiated them
Right.
for AMCs as well.
I think that taking the iPad away from a child is actually a good analogy for this because there is no, so I hate this like moral absolutism. Like these business decisions, they turn them into like moral
But they
issues,
can be
which
moral ones, right? Just to be clear, this is
they
speaking about
can.
priorities.
But like back to the iPad, let's say a parent takes the child's iPad away, right?
I don't know if I agree with that statement, Lisa. Overhead 28 to 40%. I'm not necessarily seeing that. You're talking
Uh,
about AMCs
no, on our budget, like I'm a private site, we get like a 30%,
as a
35%.
standard overhead.
We have to negotiate for it.
But
The
do you get
standard
like,
is usually something like 10,
yeah,
20 that the sponsor gives you, and then you try to
yeah,
get it to like 30, 35. When I
that
when I first started in research, man,
I
I
remember
didn't
you had
even know. Yeah, I didn't
exactly
even know you had an overhead. So
correct.
people were like, "No, no, you have to. What do you mean? What are you doing,
Right,
dude?" And I'm like,
right,
"Okay, well, let me Google like near me." So I
right.
found UCLA,
Yeah,
and their overhead policy was publicly. So I just basically copy and pasted. I
right,
did a China,
right.
right? And I made it like appropriate to my site, and I got
Yeah.
my 40%.
Hell,
Only
Helen.
place I've seen more than 30. No, that's not true, Helen. You haven't met Chris Sauber.
But I think what I'm saying though is you're more unusual than
No,
most sites.
no,
I've when I'm negotiating for sites for smaller
more
sites, that's not.
experienced.
I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm saying you're more unusual than you might think. I've negotiated for large academic institutions. I've negotiated for smaller for smaller sites. There is there is a difference.
China.
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 I worry for him when he speaks
Can
every
I
single
get
time.
back to this iPad analogy? I really
Yes,
like that. I
please.
think there's something here. Okay, you equated, and I think it's a good one. It's like a parent taking away iPad from a child. Hey, you've been using this too much. Like it's bad for your brain, right?
Okay.
Or whatever.
Sure.
Proponents would say, yeah, you should. Like that's parental control. That's responsible parenting. It's
It
you
speaks
gotta
to like ethics, right? So someone might say as a parent, the kid should have the iPad so he can communicate with his friends, and that's how he's going to socialize. That's how they currently learn.
right,
You
right.
taking it away suddenly deprives him of engagement that he could have, and that's absolutely a value choice.
And it's also potentially a detriment to
Correct.
his growth.
The other side of that same equation, absolutely.
And the other side. So this NIH thing, there's two sides to it.
Thirty-five
It's not
percent
just
standard for private sites. Whoa, I've never seen that.
well, let's save our sites. Well, they know what's up.
And
But there's two sides to these things. It's not
we are
just
definitely touching a nerve. Lisa's got a comment.
this is going to spill over if AMC can't get it from the government. They will try
I
to get
agree
it
with you, Lisa.
elsewhere, and that
I
would be
think
industry, and
this will
industry will
spill over.
fall.
I agree with you.
We
But
usually get
I don't know
pushback.
if you're going to get 40% overhead.
We get
I would
pushback
negotiate
when we
for 100.
go above
Yeah.
35. A few years ago, you could get like over 40. Now
I've
you can.
negotiated them from the sponsor side. I'm surprised you guys are saying the numbers you are. To be fair, it's been a few years since I've done that.
Oh, let me
With
pull
those
up
kinds
one of
of
my
overheads.
contracts now. I'm not going to share the screen, but I'm going to look it up and see. Just the one of the
Yeah.
more recent ones we did. Well, Chris did. But do you get what I'm saying with this iPad NIH thing? Like, it's the same. Like, if you're going to
Yeah.
argue morality
Yeah.
versus business decision, right? Because
Yeah.
that seems to be the ripping point. Like, well, this is not just business. You can't run the NIH like you
That's
run
fair.
human
That's
clinical
100%
trials.
fair.
It is 100% fair. But then the people voted for this. Like, we want efficiency, right?
I still struggle with that statement that people voted for this. And the reason I struggle with, I think people voted against something, not necessarily for something.
Correct. All right, fair
But
enough.
at least that's my perspective. Obviously,
No,
I
fair
think
enough. Fair
Trump
enough.
administration has a different take on that, obviously.
That's fair. That's fair enough. Let's see. One of my last studies. Where is it? Been doing some respiratory stuff. So
Sure. So let's look at what that, just as an example point, it's one data point, doesn't mean anything.
yeah, of course, anecdotes. But in the absence of like
Sure.
any big data, you get a
Last signed one.
Well, yeah, they're all. Let's see. This is a big one. Good job, Chris. Yeah, where am I gonna find this?
Probably around budget.
Party people. Mm-hmm. 35% overhead.
That's impressive.
Well, shout out to Chris Hopper. Shout out to
Sauber. But to be fair, Maria says that's just standard. I've never seen that as a standard.
Maria did say 35 is standard. Yeah. I mean, you don't get pushback. They'll give, again, the sponsor will give you, like by default, something with like 10%, maybe 5%. And then you're supposed to negotiate that back and forth. And the understanding is that where's the upper limit? Well, 35, although I've heard some sites getting like 60.
Really?
I don't know if still, but I've heard. Yeah.
Okay. So
I've interviewed on my podcast. I don't want to name them.
Yeah.
People can go.
So here's the thing I think I would argue. Okay, hold on. Let's pull up Lisa's comment before I go into my comment.
Man, these people are going to get us like for a 5-hour pod. Guys, we're just trying to figure out what's going on. The government agreed with, here's Lisa. The government agreed with the universities that they would pay institutions to do some of the work because the NIH couldn't do it all. Now, should that rate have been 70%? Maybe not, especially when you compound all the grants going to certain institutions. Should be more like 50. But cutting all to 15 is insane.
But I think some might argue that the 15 is a negotiating point. Maybe that's not the final place you land up. I'm not sure it's for 50. Yeah, exactly, Helen. I agree with that statement.
Only site I've seen ask for 60 was a large union hospital, and they didn't get used.
Correct.
I mean, go in my archives and look at some interviews from there. In fairness, it was like 10 years ago, but
yeah.
35 standard now for
here's my thing. I think the higher your percentage for overhead, I would start worrying because to me it starts screaming kickback. I start getting worried.
Or you might be giving up something on the line items. Like maybe we're giving up. Like I don't know. I've never seen an NIH budget and an AMC budget for the same study to compare apples to apples.
Yeah, so if in the context of an NIH study, I think it's a different discussion. I meant in the context of a private site and a sponsor.
Okay.
No, and a sponsor, like a large sponsor. If someone was giving 60% as overhead as a standard thing just across the board, I would start worrying from a compliance perspective because you don't actually know where that money's going. And to me, this idea that we don't know where this budget is allocated, but we're saying that it's fair market value, I don't know how you come up to that assessment. Mm-hmm. So I would, from a fair market value perspective, start struggling a little bit more with it. And I know other people have different perspectives on it, but you're basically saying, oh, I can throw out a number. I think that's my overhead. Everything else is the same as everywhere else, but I just need an extra 60% on top.
Why? Right. So, and the 15% overhead. So the NIH does, like the NIH give, like, let's say there's a study, right? The NIH doesn't actually do the same study Yuma Clinical Trials does.
Sure, absolutely.
The closest thing would be an NIH funded AMC that will do the same study, Academic Medical Center. And then you can't even compare like Yuma Clinical Trials to the NIH. You would have to compare it to a derivative of it, which would be like University of Arizona.
Sure. I don't think
same budget.
The logic.
Okay. So this study I just looked at, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure U of A has it.
Oh,
University of Arizona. Sure. I'm sure their overhead is whatever. It could be more than 15. They're not NIH.
It probably almost definitely is. Yep. Agreed.
Yeah. So the issue with NIH is more from an infrastructure standpoint, as far as their lab equipment and maintenance and all that stuff. It's not even to do actual studies. It's to do like investigator-initiated studies, not industry-sponsored studies. Industry-sponsored studies is something totally different.
Sure, I agree. Kevin, what common services? I think he's listing a few of them.
What common services considered overhead? Regulatory ad? Yeah, like for us, it's Creo, it's Patient Ace, it's all the tools we use to help our studies. It's creating our YouTube videos. It's having our
And some
admin,
would argue that maybe you shouldn't be putting that into the budget. That's your cost of doing business.
right?
A
But if you
YouTube
can
video.
put it in the overhead,
No, I'm not saying you should.
yeah,
Hey, if I'd get away with it, I'd consider it. But I
yeah,
think, I think the position Trump's taking is that that shouldn't be on my dime or our dime.
right. Kelvin says Harvard has a lot of endowments. I think that was a prime argument for the indirect cost cap. And I heard
Yeah.
something from Harvard was like 70%. Here we
I've
go.
heard anywhere from 60 to 70%.
Imagine a grant going to University of Montana and they only have one RO1. They need 70% indirect. They only have one RO1, but Harvard has 10 RO1s. They could afford 40 to 50% indirect.
But that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
So it's favoring those who need it least in many cases.
So it's a network effect.
Yeah.
Right. In that case.
And again, we're picking on Harvard. We don't actually know the details. So just to be clear.
Everyone's favorite to pick on.
So yeah.
Well, yeah, this is a hot topic, but I don't know. At the end of the day, I think the industry will figure out a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's gonna be more pain before it's figured out. The question is, were we overdue for pain? The other question that I have genuinely is, how could they have done it without causing the pain? How do you say no to that iPad?
You can't. It's gonna hurt you. Yeah, the kid's gonna cry.
Yeah.
You know, the kid's gonna argue if he's smart. I'm gonna be behind my peers when it comes time to get a job because I'm technologically inept.
Yep.
I mean, there's a lot of reason for why. And there's also a lot of reason for why not. You're getting inappropriate hits of dopamine that are not appropriate. You could do all kinds. It's addictive.
Yep.
There's all kinds of arguments, pro and
Absolutely. Con. I think that based on what Doge is saying, they're going to get rid of. They're trying to get rid of. I think it's like $2 trillion. Is my recollection was the number I'd seen thrown around. If you're getting rid of $2 trillion, I don't know anyone that's not going to be in pain. That's not going to be devastated.
Every government entity or anyone that gets their funding from government entities is going to be hurting.
Yeah.
Lisa says this is going to be devastating for AMCs, and that's exactly right. Do you think their tech transfer offices can make up for some of this lost revenue by doing private-public partnerships with companies like small biotechs?
I think that's going to be the effort, right? Tech transfer offices are going to have to go from being, at Lisa's point.
This is a typical Elon strategy: go in by disruptive and then figure it out like Twitter, but this is people's lives.
I don't know if the word typical applies. He's done it once, but I think the point stands that he's done it at least once.
And he's the guy. Let's not pretend like he's a nobody. Like, he can return rockets back to their launching pad from outer space.
Not how relevant that is to research, though.
Well,
to human research.
Disruptive and then figure it out. He's figured it out.
Sure.
Government hasn't. Like, there's astronauts are stranded in space. He's gonna go get them.
Yeah.
So he's proven he could figure things out. I think.
But I think Lisa's point, to be fair, is yes, he'll figure it out, but along the way, he's affecting thousands of lives.
Yes, there should have been a contingency in place. Like, I've read, and I don't know if it was sensationalism or whatnot, but cancer studies just being paused in the middle of patients receiving treatments.
Sure,
I don't know how true that is. I mean, I imagine there's been some truth. Pediatric rare diseases, like, who wants that? There should have been, and hopefully there is going to be some contingencies for those individuals that are on the outlook.
I think he's just firing them right now, isn't he? Oh, you mean for the patients themselves?
For those studies, yeah.
Well, obviously there aren't right now, right? And someone asked me a question.
That's how I would have done it differently. If you're tasked with this,
Yeah.
you need to take care of those patients like
Yeah.
that are most
So,
affected by
someone
this.
asked, well, can the patient sue? Was the question that came up. And I think
Probably you could sue anyone for anything.
you can't sue anyone for anything. The question is there a possibility of success? And I think the problem you face is what's called sovereign liability.
Mhm.
Essentially, the government gets to decide what they can be sued for. And the question really is, so there are two different things. So one is sovereign liability, which basically means that the government goes, I can't be sued for withdrawing a grant. In which case the court can't go, well, you need to pay him because I didn't sign up for this. The other one is, well, can I sue President Trump or can I sue Elon Musk? President Trump is a different beast than Elon Musk. President Trump, if he's acting in his role as president, he may not be. Again, there are laws, and I don't know the specific details right now. I have to look into this 20 years ago. But if you're acting generally like a cop or a judge, if you're acting in your role as a cop or a judge, you can't be sued. Now, when you go outside that scope, is when you can be. The question is Trump behaving outside the scope of being a president? I think there's a harder argument there. On the other hand, Musk doesn't have, if I understand it correctly, he doesn't have an official role that can be defined. So if that's true, he may have more vulnerability than he knows.
Right.
So
yeah, you one just hopes that there is some consideration for the patients and currently in the studies on life altering trials, right?
Yeah.
Which I've only read like one sensationalist piece, which hopefully they just found the needle in the haystack. But even then, it was
people are getting hurt right now. Let's be very clear about it. Now,
and
the
it's not
question
just the
of how
employees
many,
either.
the question of how many is definitely in play.
Yeah.
And is that the price we as a society are willing to pay? Is the question we're asking right now.
Yeah.
And I think Lisa is very clear that no, it's not a price we should pay. And I think that is a very, very respectable position to take.
And I know
And
from
Musk is saying he's willing to pay that price. And President Trump is saying he's willing to pay that price.
And from personal experience, which I don't know if the New York Times piece was going to discuss this, but typically the standard practice, I know based on being a site owner and being a CRA as well, when a site goes out of business and they have ongoing subject visits, they are transferred to, there are attempts made to transfer those patients to nearby sites.
Sure.
So the patients are not affected. So like most of these AMCs are in large metro areas, you would hope there's a site near them that can absorb the patients.
The question is who, it's not so much that they get transferred, who pays for the work? That's the problem we have right now.
Right? Or the NIH.
But the sponsor, but there's no money coming from the NIH. That's the problem.
If it's an investigator-initiated trial, yes.
Yes,
correct.
That's the problem.
Yeah. Now sponsors can come in and rescue the
Why
study,
would they?
Right?
Why would they?
It's promising. Maybe they work out something like Kelvin says, private-public collaboration.
Yeah, those are usually done. I've worked on public-private partnerships before, collaborations before. It's real, and I think Lisa's pointing out that you can't really do that with AMC research. With public-private partnerships and the like, those are set up years in advance. You don't just go, oh, you know what? I'm just going to come in and fund the gap. That's not typically how that works. You're taking on a lot of risk for no clear reward.
Right.
Because you don't even know what the original outcome was. Do you want to get into this? There are like 500 options. Do I take this one or take another one?
Yeah.
Just seems not
this
the
is
one.
Kind of a scorched earth policy, and when patients' lives are affected.
Yes, exactly right.
I would hope there's some contingencies there, which
it's unlikely there are.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are any contingencies. This is so, but again, let's go back to the Musk position. There you go. Patrick's pointing out the same thing.
Many sponsors, especially startups, can't afford to come in and pay for the studies.
Exactly right.
Hey, Patrick, how's it going, man? It's been a while.
That's a really good picture, Patrick. I don't know what you do, but
I had lunch with Patrick here in Yuma.
Yeah. Oh, okay. We could
Yeah.
keep going, but we're kind of hitting the hour.
Well, look, you're back now. I'm kind of developing my
Yeah, we're gonna do
routine
like a weekly
again.
thing again.
We could do a weekly thing again. I think the people demand it.
Demanded is good.
I think the
I'm glad
people
people want
demand it. I think people respect that we don't necessarily go all in on one side. Like,
Yeah,
unless we feel like we should,
sure.
which I don't think there's been a case where that's actually been as clear as black and white. This is okay. There's
No,
clearly
let's
in
be
this
clear. I
case
think
patients.
patient safety. I think we can all agree that
Yeah,
it's pretty black and white, and
yeah.
we should have clearer plans than what we did in the context of patient safety.
Well,
I
maybe in
don't
the future
think
we have like insurance policies for if funding dries up at investigator-initiated trial sites. Insurance
who
comes in and pays for the rest of the treatment.
that's. I don't know if I'm buying that. I don't know if I'm getting an insurance company going, we'll cover the gap if the government suddenly stops
If the
paying.
funding dries up, yeah,
I think the risk is so low.
yeah.
I mean, it's the first time I know of
It's like a
in
once in a
history.
lifetime
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah,
It's unfortunate, man. But you know what? The interesting thing is the majority of people complaining on my LinkedIn news feed are not complaining about the patients necessarily. They're complaining
yeah.
about themselves and their
But
paychecks, which
to be
is
fair,
fine.
they were affected like a lot as well. They probably lost their jobs.
Of
They probably
course.
lost their livelihoods.
Of course.
Um,
But you're in the game.
Different.
Like if you're on the field, you're gonna get tackled. You might
Not
get
the,
injured.
see, this is a great example. You just said if you're in the field, you expect to get tackled, except not if you're the Empire, and that's what they thought they were.
Well, enter MAGA and the Empire is no longer
Suddenly,
protected.
the Empire's in play. How did that start?
The what is it? The Emperor has no clothes. What did Warren
Yeah,
Buffett say when the when the tide goes back, you can see you swimming naked.
yeah, but I think it was in a very, very different
Very
context.
different one. Yeah, yeah.
um,
Point is, if you're a worker making a living, you're
yeah,
not the same as a patient receiving a
that's
life-altering
fair. That's
treatment.
fair. What's Sarah saying?
Sarah, where is Sarah?
Sarah Connell.
We got all kinds of new people on
I
here.
know.
Guys, we're gonna stop this right now. Deidre says guardrails. Sarah says watching the impact on large CROs who have government contracts as well as small biotechs funded by government. I'm holding, but impact.
Huge
Well,
impact.
I don't know. Huge.
I think everyone. I don't think there's in the life sciences industry. If you say you weren't impacted, you're lying.
Well, so far
Or
sites are
you
not
don't
private.
understand what you're doing.
Yeah, so far private sites are not. But like you said, it could be a few years out. Who knows?
Right. Right. Exactly right.
Unless something comes in to take over this and start the new paradigm.
Yeah. I think Lisa's got a point. Maybe we need to do this the next time around.
This is because I
How
do
are
think a
indirect
light
costs?
needed to be shined on how indirect were used and how grants were allocated.
Yep.
But this was too drastic and hurt patients. And to be honest, I don't know enough about that world, but I'm going to just go out on a limb and say human nature, people tend to try to do less, myself included. If you're not being watched, you're going to slack. If somebody notices, hey, this money went over here, we got away with it, let's do it again. And I think there was a lot of that going on at scale, and unfortunately, it's the consequences of all that. But these staff in the field must be working to process these patients and their safety. Yeah, I think for the patients that were in there, they should have considered something like that. And it must have been what 10% of the trials going on where it's like life or death situation for patients. They should have accounted for that, in my
Yeah.
opinion, and hopefully they still do. This is a
Yeah, I do
dynamic
hope they get a
situation.
chance to do that. Yeah. So we can keep going, but I think we should call it because I think this is a good high note to stop on.
Well, I don't know if it's a high note, but it's I guess
Interest,
Lisa,
though, from an interest perspective, not from a
right.
impact perspective.
We're all interested in this,
Yeah.
guys, and it's not a simple thing, and it's not. There's no easy ways to look at it because drawing on Lisa's last statement, a light needs to be shined
Yeah.
on where these funds were going and grants being allocated. So how are two talking heads on YouTube gonna know if even the insiders don't know where these things are going?
Oh, look at Deidre's last comment.
I'm not sold on separating researcher layoff versus patients. It's overlapping. I agree for the 10% where it's like maybe life or death situations. Yes, I agree. But if it's like a weight loss study and you have private industry options, right? I'm talking about the one of one. This study, rare disease, patients with cancer that are on their last, wind of life, and there's no other site to do this at versus like an obesity trial or a dermatology trial. I mean, they're not the same. And I don't think that was the majority of the research being done with the NIH. I think there was a good amount of it, but I think it was like in those extreme cases, maybe 10%, 15. I don't know what that number is, but it's not 100 and it's not 0.
Yeah. So, Mr. Safara, we're gonna. Or for those
We're gonna
people who
lose
don't know, coming
followers. I'm looking at live. Both of our, I'm refreshing my LinkedIn and your LinkedIn, and we're losing followers by the
it's
dozens.
dropping.
Yeah. So you could buy our stock now. We're kind of trading low. Darshan, it's been a pleasure, man.
Pleasure as always, sir. Good
Listen,
to see
hope
you.
the
For those
damage
people
was
who don't know,
severe.
Dan became a father less than 2 weeks ago, and please join me in congratulating him
Thank
because
you,
it's awesome. I'm so happy for him.
man. Well, thank you. Hopefully,
He's got his young son into chaos. And Dan, just so everyone knows, what is his name?
Max Alexander.
So it's not like a minimum Alexander. He's the maximum Alexander you can have. He's
Yes,
Max Alexander.
and he's got me maxed out on my caffeine.
There you go. Helen says
So,
congratulations.
thank you, Helen. Thank you, Deidre, for watching. Thank you, Sarah, Calvin. I appreciate it.
Neat picks. You know
LinkedIn
what?
user, identify yourself, but thank you, Maria. Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, Kevin, a little early for that. What an amazing dad. But I think
Hopefully.
he's going to be great. I think he's going to be amazing.
Hopefully. 2 weeks into it, so much harder than I thought. I told my wife, and I think I said this on a last live stream. So much respect for the working parents out there, especially mothers. I don't know. You have to go through it to actually understand. Like, hats off to you guys and gals, and mostly gals. Unreal.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you, Darshan.
Thanks,
We got
everyone.
more. As we learn more, we will talk more, discuss more.
Awesome. Thank you,
That's it.
sir.
Like, subscribe, comment, share. Don't unfollow us too much, right? We'll see you later. Bye-bye.